switch off your mobile phone to silent to avoid interruptions during the program. As is customary in Tibetan tradition, we begin with prayer to mark this special occasion and to honor the memory of Mr. Pinto Wangchula. Please join us as Kushalobsang Srutanla leads us in the opening prayer. Through his work, Mr. Pinzo reminds us the strength of human spirit, its pain, resilience, and hope. This evening is more than a book launch. It is an act of remembrance, resistance, and solidarity. Let us honor his work by listening deeply, connecting meaningfully, and carrying this message forward. It is now my honor to invite our chief guest, Dr. Zoe, Executive Director of Australian Tibetan Council, to officially launch the two books. Can I now ask Mr. Sean Moran, representing MP Michael Regan's office, to say a few words, please?
Thank you, and thank you everybody for having me here with you today on behalf of Michael Regan. Michael is the New South Wales Independent Member for Wakehurst, and he's so profoundly sorry that he can't be here with everybody today as well. But I want to say thank you so much for having me in his stead. It's really lovely to be here with you today. I want to start by saying that Michael and our whole team acknowledge our local Tibetan community and the profound positive impact that you have on our wider Wakehurst community as well. We have such admiration for your strength of spirit, and we have such a strong and beautiful Tibetan community on the Northern Beaches, and I was very blessed to work with a number of people from the community for many years, and got some friends in the room as well, know chosen really well, and yeah, so it's just really lovely to be here with everybody. We know this is a really important day and a really solemn anniversary. So we want to recognise the courage of former political prisoners and truth tellers, and the importance of sharing your stories. It's really special to be here in this room today, in this Parliament House, I also want to acknowledge how special it is that New South Wales Parliament have such a robust and profound commitment to multiculturalism and human rights. So I hope everybody feels really welcome here today. And I want to take this opportunity to extend Michael's and our whole team's condolences again for this solemn anniversary. We honour the advocacy for freedom and justice. And thank you very much again for having me here today to join you, and thank you very much on behalf of Michael and our whole team. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Mr. Sean. We truly appreciate the friendship and support you give to our community. Can I now welcome Ms. Dongdi Kinsamla, former Southeast Asia representative to the Tibetan Parliament, to share a few insight into the life and legacy of the author, Mr. Pinso Wanchula, and his book in English.
I also want to start by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land on which we meet today, the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation. And I also want to acknowledge our former political prisoners and elders in our community, especially Sosha Gurubuche, Paul Gyawla, and all of you here. And so, friends, Sean, thank you for being with us today. And we gather here today to honor the life of a comrade, a friend to many of you, Chado Pinso Wanchula, also known as Dutta La, a patriot, a political prisoner, a poet and a writer, and above all, a symbol of unwavering resilience of the Tibetan people. As you know, Dutta La was born in Thoga, in central Tibet in December 1974, and like any child growing up in the 1970s, he was living under the heavy shadow of the Chinese occupation. So even at an early age, he understood what it meant to live without freedom. He studied at the local primary school, where he was able to study Tibetan, Chinese, English as well, and subjects like chemistry, physics, geography, and history. But more than what was taught in the school textbooks, he absorbed what was happening around him. The suppression of Tibetan language and religion, the silencing of voices, and the growing pain of a generation who were watching their culture disappear before their very eyes. So in the late 1980s, the Tibetan people rose up. The 1987 uprising sparked a wave of peaceful protests across Lhasa and many parts of Tibet, and many of the Tibetans who took part in those demonstrations are here with us today, and Dutta La was one of them, calling for Tibet's independence and the return of His Holiness the Dalai Lama to Tibet. A young student at the time, he joined this movement for a free Tibet with immense courage. He was barely a teenager when he began standing up to one of the most ruthless regimes in the world. And by the early 1990s, when studying in Thoka, he helped organize peaceful campaigns and distribute political writings that called attention to the Tibetan struggle. And in May of 1994, he led an initiative at his school to raise awareness of the Tibetan cause. A month later, he was arrested. He was only 19 years old. And at his trial in Thoka by the Intermediate People's Court, he was sentenced to 5 years in prison and handed 2 years of deprivation of his political rights. He was sent to the notorious Tapchi prison in Lhasa, where his real ordeal began. In prison, he was tortured, he was beaten repeatedly, so brutally that he lost sight in one eye, lost his hearing, and sustained permanent damage to his legs. He became partially paralyzed. His spirit was tested every day, yet he never broke. And in May 1995, during a ceremony where prisoners were forced to raise the Chinese flag and chant state propaganda, Dutta La refused to comply. And along with 500 other prisoners, he protested. The Chinese authorities responded with violence. Prisoners were beaten, some so severely that they were never the same again, and many were killed. This was not just a crackdown, it was a message to the Tibetans: obedience to the Chinese government or death. And yet, in that moment of terror, Dr. did something few of us could imagine. Barely conscious, injured, and in pain, he stood up and shouted in Chinese, "Tibet is independent." And for this act of defiance, he was beaten again, kicked until he passed out, and taken to hospital only after he was nearly dead. He survived, and that in itself was an act of resistance. He was released in June 1999 after 5 long years, but the story did not end there. He returned briefly to his home in Hoka, but continued to face surveillance and pressure. Like many former political prisoners in Tibet, he was never truly free. So in October 2000, he made the dangerous journey across the Himalayas and arrived at the Tibetan Reception Center in Nepal that winter. By then, he was confined to a wheelchair. The torture had left his legs paralyzed, his body was broken, but his will was not. And so from Nepal, he reached Dharamsala in India, the heart of the exile movement. There he began the next chapter of his life, and that was documenting truth and writing books. At the request of the Department of the Security at the Tibetan government in exile, he wrote Freedom and Tears. It is a raw and powerful account of his imprisonment and insider's testimony of the brutality faced by Tibetan political prisoners. It is also a deeply emotional book filled with longing for Tibet, reverence for His Holiness Dalai Lama, and hope for a day when the truth will triumph. His second collection, Unforgettable Feelings, both of which we are launching today, blends his personal history with poetic expression. It's a book of prose and verse that captures not only his suffering, but the collective pain of a people denied their homeland. His writings express profound love for Tibet and our people and a deep faith in the guidance of His Holiness, whom he described as the only supreme being who needs to live for 10,000 years under the heaven. He continued to write more, a total of 4 books, and these writings reflect his identity, his dual identity as a survivor of the Chinese government's occupation and a seeker of the truth. And in these pages, we will find poems like A Faithful Melody, a tribute to Tupatenzi Dele Rinpoche, praises for his teachers, scholars, and fellow freedom fighters, but also a commentary on the Tibetan Exile Society. And as we will see, these books are more than literature. They are living history of Tibet, and I am sure they will remain long after dictators like Mao Zedong and Xi Jinping are forgotten. From 2004 to 2010, he served as the secretary of the Gujusun Association of Tibet, supporting former political prisoners and exiles in Dharamsala and across the world. He gave everything to the cause. He refused to pursue comfort. He turned down the settlement offer to move to Australia. He chose to stay in Dharamsala because, as he put it, we fought for the whole of Tibet, not for one region or one ethnic group. In these turbulent times, political prisoners must stand firm. We must not become tools for others. He was a mentor and friend to many political prisoners in the exile community. He finally immigrated to the US in 2011 and continued to serve the Tibetan cause with unwavering integrity. And last year, sadly, on 20th June 2024, at the age of 50, he passed away in New York. So we have lost a freedom fighter. But his words, his legacy, and his courage live on. So Tibet remains one of the most repressed countries in the world, consistently ranked among the least free places on this planet. There is no freedom of speech, no freedom of expression, no freedom of assembly, no freedom of religion. Monasteries are blanketed with surveillance cameras. Children are forcibly separated from their families and sent to the Chinese colonial state boarding schools where their language, faith, and identity are systematically erased. Singers, writers, teachers, students, monks, nuns, anyone who dares to speak the truth faces arrest, torture, or disappearance. There is no free press. In more than 7 decades of Chinese occupation, not a single independent journalist has been allowed to report from inside Tibet. So the absence of news from Tibet today is no accident. It is not because life in Tibet is peaceful. It's because China's brutal occupation and the repression has been normalized. It is because the Chinese government has deliberately sealed Tibet from the outside world. They don't want the world to see Tibet. They want to distract the world from what's happening in Tibet and move on to other conflicts in the world. So today, Tibet's vast system of digital surveillance has turned Tibet into a high-tech prison, an open-air prison, one of the world's biggest open-air prisons. Every movement, every phone call, every online post is tracked. Acts of religious devotion are seen as threats to the Chinese government. Even possessing a photo of His Holiness Dalai Lama can lead to a prison sentence. Political prisoners, as many of you here today can attest, their families are left in the dark, unsure whether their loved ones are or whether they are even alive. Trials, if they do occur, are held in secret. Sentences are harsh, torture is widespread, and yet, just like Dukdola, people endure. They endure because they believe in something bigger, something greater than fear. They believe in a free Tibet. They believe in our truth. So what can we do in exile and in freedom do to honor Pinzo Onchula's memory? We can speak, we can write, we can organize, we can tell his story and the stories of those still imprisoned. We can support the Tibetan political prisoners and their families. We can demand that the world stop turning away. We can be relentless in our advocacy and radical in our hope. And most of all, we can remember that the struggle for Tibet is not over. It lives on in each of us. As Shadow Punzo Wonchula did, he gave his youth, his body, and his life to this cause. He carried our flag when it was dangerous to do that. He kept our truth alive in the face of lies, and he never stopped dreaming of a free Tibet. So today we are here to honor him and to honor all the political prisoners in Tibet. To His Holiness Dalai Lama, we offer our prayers for his long life. To the people of Tibet, inside Tibet, we offer our love and solidarity, and to ensure that our shared hope and our collective efforts for Tibet continues until Tibet is free. Thank you.
Thank you, Kinzoma, for the summarized yet deeply insightful life story of Mr. Pinzo Wanchula and his resilience. A story that will bring you to tears, yet a story that many political prisoners go through. This is the reason why his book plays a crucial role to the world, to let the world know the story in Tibet. I now invite Dr. Zoe to return to the stage to share her reflection on the significance of these works and the political situation in Tibet.
Hello, Tashdale, and I'm sorry that I'll be speaking in English because I don't know Tibetan. Of course, I'll also acknowledge that we're standing today on the land of the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, and acknowledge that this land is occupied land, a nation that was never ceded in its sovereignty. And I'm going to note the connection there that we have as Tibetan freedom fighters with the first people of this country. So I stand here with you not merely to speak, but to echo the voices of those millions who have been silenced. I speak about a land that sits high on the roof of the world, the land of snow. Capped peaks, prayer flags, and spiritual heritage that has inspired people around the globe. Today we're going to speak about Tibet. Tibet is not only a place, it's a symbol. It's the soul of a people whose rights have been denied and whose culture is being systematically eroded. But it's also the story of resilience, non-violence, and unshakable hope. It's a story that begins long before 1950, when Chinese forces entered Tibet, and continues through the 75 years of occupation, repression, and resistance. Let us begin with the words of His Holiness the 14th Dalai Lama, Tibet's spiritual leader and a global icon of peace, who says, "Where ignorance is our master, there's no possibility of real peace." And ignorance has, unfortunately, shaped much of the world's response to Tibet. Too many people do not know the full story. And that is why we're here today, and why the work of writers and political prisoners such as Punsok Wanchak is so important. His writing has documented his struggles and those of his fellow political prisoners, and has advocated in his own words for Tibetan freedom and independence since the 1990s. In Tibet today, there are not so many human rights violations. Freedom of speech is a dream. It's denied to all those who raise their voice against the occupation of Tibet by China. We saw just last year when 1,000 Tibetans, including Tibetan Buddhist monks and ordinary people, were arrested en masse for protesting the destruction of their village. Their village is scheduled to be destroyed by a Chinese hydro dam project. In a blatant case of greenwashing, China is destroying the homes of Tibetans and centuries-old monasteries to provide green energy to its factory machines and cities in China. As Kingdom says, monasteries are under surveillance, Tibetan language and culture are being deliberately suppressed, and peaceful protesters, including, as we said, monks and nuns, are arrested, tortured, and people simply disappear. His Holiness the Dalai Lama has said, "It's not enough to be compassionate, you must act." And act we must, because silence is complicity. Tibetan children are being separated from their families and forced into Chinese boarding schools, where they are taught to speak Mandarin and forget their heritage. Over 1 million Tibetan children are affected by this policy. Imagine being told that your mother tongue, your prayer rituals, your traditions are obstacles to progress. This is the case in modern Tibet. Tibetan parents are denied the right to raise their children. Tibetan parents are denied the right to decide about their children's education and their religion. And in this, the 21st century, we are seeing 19th century colonial policies that are eerily similar to the stolen generation of Australia. Here in Australia, the policy of separating First Nation people from their families has been recognised as a historical injustice. And yet China is using these same methods in Tibet without international consequence. Effectively, they're operating with impunity. Tibetan children have been removed from their culture, denied their religion, and made to forget and feel ashamed of their Tibetan language. And yet, despite all this, Tibetan people have not turned to violence. They continue to resist with dignity and non-violence, inspired by the teachings of the Dalai Lama, who has steadfastly called for dialogue rather than conflict. He has said, "My religion is very simple, my religion is kindness." And this is the philosophy guiding the Tibetan struggle. But how often has the world turned its back on kindness in pursuit of profit, power, and political convenience? In the time that Australia has opened diplomatic relations with China, both China and Australia have enriched themselves through mutual trading agreements and put to the side the difficult issues of Tibet and human rights violations. And it's time for that to end. And we often, here at Australia Tibet Council, we call for the Australian government to take definitive actions on human rights and for Tibet. You might ask yourself, why should Tibet matter to me? What difference can I make? But Tibet is a test of our values, our compassion, our willingness to stand up for justice, even when it's not convenient. If we ignore Tibet, we normalise occupation, we normalise silence and cultural erasure. We allow a world where might makes right. But if we stand with Tibet, we affirm something greater, that human rights are universal, that the voices of the oppressed matter, that peaceful resistance is not a weakness, and that it is a moral strength. The Dalai Lama has said, "The world does not belong to leaders, it belongs to all of humanities." And this is a reminder that what happens in one corner of the world affects us all. The struggle of Tibetan people is part of a broader fight for freedom, dignity, and the preservation of human identity. You may be wondering, what can I do? And to that I say, you need to be courageous, like Mr. Punsop Wanchok and all Tibetan political prisoners. You can support organisations working for Tibet, organisations like Kuchu Sam, who have done such important works for former political prisoners, Tibetan political prisoners. Organisations like, of course, the Australia Tibet Council, because we work every day for Tibet. We lobby Australian parliamentarians to do more for Tibet and for Tibetan people. Australia Tibet Council is making representation to the Australian people and to the Australian government about the following campaigns. Of course, we're raising with them China's colonial boarding schools. This is an attempt at cultural genocide. This is an attempt to ensure the children are raised to be loyal to the Chinese state and to abandon their culture and language and religion and family connections. There is also evidence now that has emerged of abuse within these colonial boarding schools. Videos and testimony of children who have been beaten by teachers, children running away from the schools, families in anguish. I ask you to find and read on our website a new report by Tibet Action Institute called When They Came to Take Our Children. It's an important testimony about what is happening in Tibet today. Tibetan organisations and the Australia Tibet Council are calling for an international independent investigation by the UN into these colonial boarding schools. We're all calling for the colonial boarding schools to be closed and children to be returned to their families. We're calling for China to allow the reopening of Tibetan schools, community schools, where Tibetans can learn in their Tibetan language and live with their families. And most of all, we're calling for those responsible for the development of this policy and the implementation